Welcome to Ruined by the Internet. I'm Gareth King. Today we're asking, has the internet ruined child safety? Many people, especially parents, feel that the internet has seriously compromised the safety, well-being, and even innocence of young people by exposing them to risks that the offline world struggles to contain. To help us understand the reality, we're joined by Brett Lee, a cyber safety advocate, author, and founder of Internet Safe Education. Brett, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gareth. Pleasure to be here.
Before we begin, can you tell us a bit about the work that you do and what led you to this area of expertise?
Look, for the last 17 years, my primary business is going into school communities, whether they be primary or secondary, all across Australia and New Zealand, educating students right from prep right up to year 12, teachers and parents in relation to how to get all the great things that technology has to offer and reduce risks, so cyber safety. And how I got into this was in my former life, I was a detective. And for the last 5 years of my career, it was my job to go on the internet and assume the fictitious identities of children to locate, identify and arrest child sex offenders. And after doing that for 5 years and arresting hundreds of people just for doing the wrong thing on the internet, I was looking for something different. So to clear my head, I took a contract and I went over and I trained police in Iraq, which was a bit of an experience. And when I got back from there, I really saw the need to pass on the unique face of technology that I got to see for the end user. When I was in the police, our inspector said to me, "I've got a friend who's a principal at a local school. Would you mind going and speaking to the year 10 girls about some of the dangers?" And this would be back in like the year 2001. So we're talking 24 years ago. And me and my partner, we went there and we did a bit of a presentation, and I was just flabbergasted by the lack of insight and knowledge that these year 10 girls had. And I thought they would be the perfect victims online. So that sort of first spawned me to want to start educating the community right back in 2008. I started the current training business that we have now.
Yeah, that's, it already sounds quite heavy just through that intro. But yeah, obviously the internet, even since 2008, has just changed so much. And, I can remember when I first probably got access to the internet, it was like 1998 or something, and then I think to 2008 and then to now, and it just feels like this exponentially increasing change. So who knows, where that's going to go. But that said, from your perspective, what's the most significant ways the internet changed childhood safety and created challenges that we just weren't prepared for?
Look, I really think it is multi-leveled, and Gareth, I think you and I could talk about it for weeks, the different aspects of technology and how it affects human beings. But look, over even the last 10 years, the amount of young people who now frequent that world has dramatically increased. I know that when my kids were in high school, our biggest challenge was making sure they didn't send too many texts because you had to pay 15 cents for every text that you sent. But now, there's so many different platforms. There's so many different ways for people to connect. People are getting on older. There's a lot more content out there that could be inappropriate for young people. It's become so ingrained in every aspect of our life. And like I said, younger kids are getting online. And there's positives with that as well, but older people as well. So look, back when I started doing it, it was very limited. Not only the amount of young people that got access to public spaces online, but the amount of adults there as well. So that's the big thing I've seen is the increase in traffic on the internet, the increase in content, and the speed. I can remember, when I first started doing it, I don't know if people remember, you download a photo and when it would click down the screen as it loaded each little bit, each little frame of the photo. Now it's just instant, 4K video, instant. So, I don't think we've changed as human beings, but I think there's a lot more human beings now that are part of that world.
Yeah, I guess because it is obviously so ubiquitous in our lives, there's not really any escape from what the digital world is touching. Does it create its own set of new dangers simply by the nature of the technology, or is it simply reformatting, sorry, existing problems, in a digital way, or is it doing both?
That's a really good question. I believe it's doing both from my experience. Before the internet, a parent never had to worry about an adult person with evil intentions entering their child's bedroom.
Mm.
That's just something we never considered. Now, since the advent of the internet, when young people may go into their bedroom and they get access to technology, they can get access to these people, and predators can get access to them. And in a lot of ways, the predator there is a lot more effective because the kids don't even get a chance to see the threat. They just get a chance to see, what someone else presents to them. So, look, we've always had child sex offenders, and this is what I say to parents. We're not really dealing with any new issues. Bullies have always been around. People who want to rip us off have always been around. Child sex offenders have always been around. This is a new medium, but it's a very effective one where predators can connect with young people very quickly. They can move through different ones to identify a need or a vulnerability. And the internet is the perfect platform for that. Not saying it's the internet's fault, of course, but it's the perfect vehicle for child sex offenders.
Mm. And I think that point you touched on earlier around kind of, just pretending to be obviously somebody that you're not, like the whole point, what's that saying, on the internet, nobody knows that you're a dog. But I think, as you said, there's always been predators. I can remember back
Yeah.
when I was a kid and you would see it in the news and someone got kidnapped or something. And that kind of
Yeah.
felt, almost so invasive that someone might go into someone's house and do that. But
Yeah.
as you said, now with the device and the access to this digital world, it's almost like that threat is less personal, but it's constantly in your pocket. And I think that just the avenues, as you said, just lets people with that intent just have so many more options to be doing this sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Look, that's exactly right. And you touched on something there that I talk about, whereby the internet can dehumanize people, where we're dealing with two-dimensional data. And I wrote a book on the different types of predators out there, from the slow patient groomer to the speedy predator to the boy lover to predators who are specific as to what they're looking for. And there's a predator that I call the opportunist, which I believe is somebody who probably never would have offended against a child in the physical world. And this is just my opinion from my experience. But presented with a child on the internet, maybe they sorted out, maybe they didn't. They're prepared to do the wrong thing by that child. So again, this is the nature of technology that, I say to parents, if we don't teach our kids about the nature of that world, the internet's very good at sucking things out of people's minds that would normally stay there and encouraging sometimes good people to make bad choices. And please don't get me wrong, because someone's an opportunist, the damage that they can have on a child is just as great. And just going back to where you said about how I pretended to be a young person online and how effective that screen can be. I remember when I'd arrest a child sex offender, every single one of them, and they were sitting in the police station being interviewed. And I disclosed to them that you weren't talking to a 12-year-old boy or girl, you were talking to me. And I could tell by the look in their eyes that they were struggling to comprehend that. Because that child that they were talking to online was as real to them as someone walking around in the street. And some of them needed convincing. They thought that child was real, that I was actually lying. So that's the effect that, technological use, looking at that screen can have on a human being's mind. And they were adults.
Do you think, since that time, that mindset would probably still remain? Are people still in this disbelief, or are we so desensitized to being hit with things that aren't as they seem through digital means that there'd almost that be that kind of assumption? There'd be no surprise if you were to hypothetically say that to somebody today.
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. I like to think that I'm a bit of a thought leader in relation to this technology and the human mind and how we interact, but that's something I've never progressed past myself. So, look, I really, that would be hard for me to say. I just know it imprints a very real picture on a person's mind. I liken it to, and this is just layman talk, that as human beings, we're set up that seeing is believing. So as soon as we look at a screen, if we don't start to challenge ourselves and think critically, that our mind automatically makes us believe it's real because we got nothing else to grasp onto. And that's why, I still meet adults who this year have been scammed by a Nigerian prince. And a true story.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
when you say to them, don't you know that was a scam? And they say, oh, yeah, I've heard of those scams, but this was real. So, yeah, it's a very personal individual thing. It's an individual looking at a screen and how it affects someone's mind. Of course, it would differ because everybody's different, personalities and,
mm,
maybe even our life experiences, what life's presented to us already. But yeah, I just know it has an incredibly powerful effect.
yeah.
Particularly, I think when someone wants it to be real. So those predators that I arrested, I wrote in my book that they go through 5 steps, and one of those steps is they have to identify a need or a vulnerability, so they can feel that need or vulnerability, and that's how adults get scammed. Their vulnerability or need is they want money, and they want it
Mm.
quick. They don't want to have to work for it. So that becomes a need where their intelligence or their life skills, sort of goes by the way, and they're driven by that desire. That can, I think, encourage people to believe things are real as well that aren't real because they want it to be real.
And I think it is, the technology gets more sophisticated, and you always read about people falling for, please transfer this money into this bank account. It looks like it's come from their bank. And
Yeah.
I guess my concern with that kind of thing as well, as we know, with the rise of AI and even another layer of kind of pretend online, that it's just going to get so much worse, and I'll eventually fall victim to it. But in that said, as we are talking around different platforms and ways that people can kind of gain access for nefarious means, in your opinion, what platform design features are the most harmful to young people's, say, mental health and beyond, and what are the impacts that these features have?
Okay. Look, I would say one of the main functionalities that can make a platform or program very concerning is the illusion of anonymity or the promise of anonymity, where it's been proven that if someone believes they're anonymous, it can encourage them to make a bad choice. And some people will hide behind that perceived anonymity, and they use it to target and attack other people. There was a program released called Sahara. And I'm not sure whether you're aware of it, but it's one of those many that came and went. It didn't last long. And if you downloaded it from the App Store, its promise was that, look, if you're in the workplace, it's for the workplace, and you want to compliment another worker, but you're embarrassed to say it to their face, you can anonymously give them a compliment in the Sahara app. What they found when it was released, it was used for exactly the opposite. It was
Yeah,
used
of
to
course.
target and attack other people. So I do say to people, stay away from those programs and apps that promise to give other people anonymity because they hide behind it. The E-Safety Commission has just, at the end of the year, we're going to have some new laws in Australia, and there's something called an age-restricted social media site. So young people under 16 years of age legally won't be allowed to have these programs or apps. Now, there's a definition that covers age-restricted social media programs, and that is where 2 or more people, generally in a random way, can connect and interact on a personal level and share information. That's where young people have a lot of problems as well. So we're talking open social media sites.
Mm.
They have found that through research that young people aged between particularly 11 and 15 have decreased life satisfaction when they're exposed to these social media sites for extended periods of time. And of course, it gives others access to get to contact them and get personal information and interact in that personal way. And that's what particularly child sex offenders need. Most of them need to, well, I'd say nearly all of them need to interact on a personal level. They need to know who their victim is for a start. So they may meet in a public place like a gaming site, video sharing site, social media, and then go to a more private program to interact. So that's another that's another risk factor, would be sites whereby social media where people can connect and start interacting and sharing information. Yeah, so they're probably the two main areas.
Okay, on those points, you mentioned this that specific age range of children, and the
Mm.
research born out of that. Obviously, those threats are not unique to people within that age group. Is there a particular reason that age group is more vulnerable? Is it simply lack of life experience, or is it the development of the brain to not kind of have that self-protecting way of thinking that, say, older people might have?
Yeah, look, I don't have a medical background, but I've heard some very clever people in the medical field speak at conferences. And that is, you hit the nail right on the head, is brain development. So their brain hasn't fully developed, particularly specific parts of it. It's about self-managing choices as well. And that relates to the brain development as well. But it's also life skills. I mean, we learn as we go. Children are very trusting. And it's a beautiful thing, but that makes them very vulnerable when it
Yeah.
comes to dangers presented by the outside world. And before technology, parents could manage that a lot more effectively. When I was growing up, my world was the world that was presented to me outside my front
Mm.
door. You know, I grew up in a town, I like to say Australia's tourism capital, Ipswich. And I didn't even know the kids who lived on the other side of town. And now young people can get on and interact with people
Mm.
older than themselves in every corner of the world. And some of these people don't have the same values. They don't have the same care for the children or beliefs. So, I definitely think it's brain development and it's life skills. And look, young people are looking for something different from the world and technology than we are as adults.
Mm.
They want to make friends. They want to be noticed. They want to explore. They want to take risks. They want to grow up quickly, and all of that makes them incredibly vulnerable online. But like you said, every issue that I talk to parents about that their children may face online, adults are facing it every day of the week as well.
Yeah, that's is interesting in there as well as around that age group kind of, in that phase where you don't really know who you are. You're still working out who you are and growing into yourself. And as you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
the internet or the digital world allows you to test and sample lots of different things, which assuming, opens up so many doors to help you work out who you are, but also opens up so many avenues for people with bad intentions. But I guess that leads me to my question. You meant we can talk about this social media ban. Why was it age 16 and not lower or higher? Is there any particular reason?
Again, a good question. I can only surmise, and I'll tell you what some of my thoughts are. They had to start somewhere. So
Okay.
they thought if if we start at 17 or 18, we're going to get a bigger backlash. Let's get the community used to this first. And I think the real young kids, 15, not that that's real young, but 15 and below, they are the most vulnerable. Only because what we're talking about lesson to brain development and life skills. So I think that's where they're starting. Will it increase in the future? Maybe. We don't know. How will this roll out? We don't know. Will it be perfect at the start? We know that. No, nothing is. But I believe it's about changing changing our community whereby we create a new norm. And I spoke to parents last night and I said to them, maybe in 10 years time a parent's going to go to another parent, do you remember back when kids under 15 used social media? And that other parent will probably go, no. Oh, yes, that's right. So what we're trying to do is change a community. That's what we're trying to do. Just like kids have to be a certain age to vote, to get tattoos, to drink, to smoke, this is going to be another one. And our government's determined that this is for their health and well-being, the same as those other things that are.
Mm.
So I think they've started at 15. No, well, 16, you can have a restricted social media site, so
Mm.
it's under 16. So I think that's probably why they targeted that. And of course, it was to do with their research as well. So one
Yeah.
bit of research they had was that they researched 17,400 young people in that age bracket. And they found that particularly, I think it's girls between 11 and 13 and boys between the age of 14 and 15, as I mentioned before, that they had decreased life satisfaction, maybe due to extended use, so they're missing out on education or other activities. Maybe it was being exposed to inappropriate content, being groomed, or, bullied as well.
Mm.
So cyberbullying. So it's not kicking kids off the internet. It's just restricting them from some of the programs that have been causing a lot of issues for young people in this country.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's just on the point of bullying there. It's like, the more I've spent time thinking about this ban and the pros and cons, and without going into either of our position on it, one of the things that I've kind of tried to wrap my head around is the fact that, as you said, bullying. Say you're getting bullied at school. I remember when I was at school, you might get bullied for the 6 hours a day that school was there, and
yeah,
then once you're home, you're safe again, and you can escape that
yeah,
bullying. But the fact that so many young people have these phones with so many avenues to bully, and there's just kind of no escape from
yeah,
that or whatever other problem there. Like it just makes me really wonder that, I just can't wrap my head around what it must be like to be a young person being bullied and
yeah.
just literally have no escape unless you threw your phone in the bin or something. Um, okay, well, while we just touch back to the potential social media ban, you mentioned that there'd be a kind of a restricted internet, that when 16 you turn 16 and you might get your L plates for the internet, kind of metaphorically. What would that look like, and would it potentially bring another sort of risk, which might be taking someone who's 16 and just throwing them onto the internet with kind of no exposure to anything? Does that make them more naive, or is it that they're a bit older and they might be able to, recognize the danger signs?
Look, that possibly could be the case, but I don't think that's what's happening here. So at the moment, they've only got 5 programs that are going to be age restricted. So that means, children up to the age of 15, with the guidance of their parents, can basically have access to every single thing, other thing on the internet.
Okay.
So it's only these 5, and it's going to be managed by the social media companies themselves.
Mhm.
So they're going to be required to establish identity. And if someone's under the age of 16, it is their responsibility. The onus is on them to not allow that account to be created, or if there is a person under 16 with one, to deactivate or delete that account. So the total onus is going to be on the social media companies themselves. And at this stage, there's 5 of them. At this stage, I believe, look, it's changing every day. YouTube's not included, so a young person can still use YouTube. I believe they can still use messaging programs.
Mhm.
I believe they can visit websites and research and learn, that they can connect with other people. I think it's more the open, unmoderated, really, and unmonitored social media sites that they wanted to target. So there's only 5 that have come under the definition so far,
Okay.
and that is X, formerly Twitter. I like it when they change their name, but you still got to say both now. Um, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and the other one is, you probably guess it, TikTok. So they're the
Yeah,
5
right.
that they've identified that come under that definition. And some people say, well, what if those programs modify some of its functionality so it doesn't come under that definition? I say, fantastic. That's the whole point. So then, 13, 14, 15-year-olds may be able to use it because they have made it that bit safer. That I don't see. And when you really think about it, for those those multi-level, multinational companies that make billions of dollars, I think losing customers from, 13, 14, 15 is not going to affect their bottom line that much. So,
What about something like Reddit, perhaps? Like Reddit is very anonymous, but
Mhm.
it's not that kind of visual stuff. I mean, obviously,
I know.
something like X is not
Yeah.
really like that, but where would something like Reddit fall into this?
Look, there are so many programs out there that aren't healthy for young people, that probably at this stage, they're calling this phase 1, that won't come under the guise of these restricted social media sites. Now, there's companies that are run from other countries as well. I'm not sure where Reddit's run from, that refuse to comply. So that's going to be another challenge as well. So look, I always say it always comes down to the parent. I mean, but I know the struggles parents have. I'm a parent myself, and I know the struggles they have, and it is hard to manage. But if the parent managed it effectively at their end, I don't believe this would be needed, but it is very difficult. And look, there are so many other programs. There's a program called Ask FM, which is an incredibly dangerous program, being linked to hundreds of teen suicide around the world.
Really?
And its main feature is promises anonymity, and they don't care what's said on there. They nearly encourage people to do the wrong thing, and the people who own it don't care. So they will not do anything about it. And it's not run out of a country like Australia or England or Canada that monitors and investigates this
Right.
and
What?
has oversight. Yeah.
Just to clarify, what is Ask FM? How does it work?
Ask FM is where now Ask FM's been around for about 20 years.
Mm.
And it's I call them fringe programs. Reddit, for kids, I call Reddit a fringe program. One or two may use it for a while, a couple of their friends, then it drops away. They go back to the normal ones, Snapchat, TikTok. So Ask FM is where you can connect randomly with other people, or you can select people who you know on there. You don't need, of course, there's no identity verification, and you can ask them a question. But what happens, it turns into a cesspool of bullying. And I mean really, really bad bullying. And why do people do it there more than anywhere else? Because of that promise of anonymity. So that's all it is. And parents go, oh, it's got to be more to it. No, there is no more to it. That's it. So that's the
Yeah.
effect that can have on a young person, just that promise of anonymity. Look, it is becoming quite rare. You know, 15 years ago, I'd go into a school and the students had heard of Ask FM, whether they had or hadn't used it, the school had heard of it. If I go into a school now, there's a very good chance the teachers may have heard of it, maybe not, but the kids haven't. But they're still out there and they can infect communities very quickly.
Yeah, I was only asking because I've seen the name and I've never looked beyond that, and I was just curious what it was. But you mentioned something a couple of minutes ago around with kind of guidance from the parents. You know, they could almost help curate a more positive experience online for their kids. So maybe we'll move on to some more positives and benefits.
Yeah,
You know, we know
yeah.
there are some.
Oh, of course.
Beyond, say, that community building and friendship and support and learning and development, what else? You know, we know that certain things allow young people to be creative. We've all heard of, you know,
Yeah.
young musicians who've been creative and posted some songs online, and then that's been their big start. So there's obviously lots of benefits
Definitely.
to access to the digital world and potentially social media for young people. How would this kind of stuff continue under, say, any kind of legislation, or would that fall into more parental or guardian guidance and access 16 plus?
Yeah, look, it'll always come down to the parent, I believe. And you just mentioned it, Gareth, that, you know, most people, not only adults, but kids, have a pretty good time on the internet. Most people don't face life-changing, you know, issues because of technology. And every school I go into, primary schools as well, sometimes right down to year 1 and 2, they're using technology to learn. Now, of course, they say to me, we've got to be very strategic about it. We're not, you know, e-learning isn't about technology. It's about learning. It's about using and managing and overseeing technology in such a way that kids can learn and stay safe while they're doing it. The problem, the issues young people generally have are not with educational programs. They're with the programs outside of that they like to use, extracurricular. And they're the ones that parents are really always going to have to manage. Because once a child walks out of the school can't put really anything in place to manage choices except education when the kids walk out. So look, with parents, you know, it's you know, if they need technology for their homework, they talk to the school and say, well, what device do they need? And it's usually the school device. How long do they need to do it? A lot of schools run those sessions for parents at the beginning of the year to say, this is how it is. There's no games to be downloaded. It's a learning device. If you have a problem, this is your contact person. So working together as a team there. And then each parent's going to have to decide with themselves what they're comfortable with when it comes to their child using technology outside of their education. And all I say to parents is there's just 5 things to remember. I hope I can remember the 5 without searching for the answers. And it's continued conversations. And I said to a parent, that's your greatest weapon, because this is really about people. Child sex offending is about people. Cyberbullying is about people. It's not about technology. So constant communication, rules and boundaries, knowing that you're the one who has control over technology. There's not really a choice you can make. If you make it, in all good faith, that's really going to change the outcome of your child's life. The other one is considering filtering or monitoring software like parental controls. And it's not about spying over kids' shoulders. It's about just helping them manage that world when it comes to just knowing where they're going, who they're communicating with. And I think every parent has a right to do that. We grasp onto that right in the physical world. I mean, why not? Why not know where my child's going and who they're communicating with? Block certain websites depending on the names of their ages of their children. Yeah, so it's pretty simple. Look, the strategies I think are simple and it can't be complicated. Life's very busy and, so I just get the parents to use some of the skills they already have, work with the school. And you know what, at the end of the day, everyone's happier. Of course, a young person is going to want to use a particular program. Of course they are, because they're a young person. But if a parent says no, everybody, I believe, is better off. If that parent does it for a reason and explains it to their child why. I've heard young people have problems in here. Let's look at something else.
Yeah, it's an interesting point around, because whenever I try and think about why do young people need a smartphone, I imagine the peer pressure is just immense, and I can just imagine that if you had a young child that was the only one without one, and then they were saying that they were being bullied because they didn't have one. I mean, that must be an incredibly hard, decision and require a lot of sternness from a parent. But I think on that, to get parents guiding the children to be, more internet safe, do you think that something like that will come more out of legislation, which takes that burden off the parents? Or do we need to get to some kind of critical mass where if everybody's doing it, the kids will kind of become more comfortable not having access to this stuff?
Look, I think so. And that's what I mentioned earlier about becoming the new norm. And I think that's what the government's doing it for, to take the pressure off parents. I hear this every single day of the week, what you just said. My child's come home and said, everybody's playing Fortnite. So that parent feels that if I don't give my child Fortnite, they're going to be the only one, they're going to miss out, I'm going to be a bad parent, and they're going to get picked on. Now, there's no evidence that says that's what's going to happen. I mean, when I was growing up, sometimes I wasn't allowed to do things that might, like go skating during the week. I didn't like that, but that's just how it was. My parents made that decision. Maybe the kids talked about skating the next day, and that made me feel a bit, that's not fair. But I moved on. And I think that's a part of building resilience as well, and not feeling I have to have everything all the time. So I think this with the government is the first step. When I speak to parents about this new law coming up, without their kids around, they can't wait.
Really?
Love it. Schools can't wait either. Schools can't wait. They said 90% of the resources we use in restorative practices is issues kids are having in social media at home. They said if we didn't have that, if we didn't have that, we would have so much more time to dedicate to everything else. So this is what's happening at ground zero with families, and it's one of the parents' biggest concerns when they're. Some of those concerns are probably unfounded. A lot of it's the unknown. They just don't know what's going on. They don't feel good about it. And it's the pressures. But I think it's going to be good that, I think creating this norm, and from there we may move forward. I think that's going to be it. So it's the opposite at the moment, where the pressure's coming in relation to using it young for no reason, and having access. Only because everyone else does, or we have that perception. So I think we just want to flip that, whereby the parent feels comfortable that, no, you don't have social media till you're 16. There's all these other programs you can use. You can go and play these games. You can chat to your mates here.
That's an interesting point there. I want to touch on two of those things. One being games, before I forget, or come back to that. And you mentioned Fortnite, but then also parents kind of not seeming so unreasonable. As you mentioned
mm,
before, you can't go skating during the week. I remember I was probably like 10 and I couldn't get some Air Jordans or something. And I
yeah.
thought my parents were the most horrible parents in the world. But it's an interesting point that I wonder whether there'll be kind of any kind of stronger connection between, say, children and parents without so much distraction of devices and things like that, because we all know that they can be used to buy some quiet time and get a little bit of peace, and that's a whole other issue that I don't really want to go too far down today. But in terms of any specific platforms and types of online activities that young people, whether they're under 16 to 18 or beyond, what ones do you see are overwhelmingly positive for kids? We know there's kind of community building, friends, and if it is Fortnite and gaming, that kind of challenge and things like that. But in your experience, what have you seen that is absolutely undeniably positive for young people online?
Look, I think where young people are having to be critical thinkers when they're using their imagination. So that's why sometimes I think gaming sites are quite good, but of course they have to be managed with time limits, because that's a whole nother discussion in relation to the triggers built into the games that affects the human brain. So I think gaming sites are good, but look, potentially they can connect with other people, and that's. But I think gaming sites are good. Look, for primary school age children, the king at the moment is Roblox. That is the king. It has well and truly taken over from Minecraft. And parents say, is it good? I say, no, it's not good and it's not bad. It just is. So you put time limits in place. You talk to your kids about language. You guide them towards positive games and who they can and can't communicate with and what to do if you have a problem, and just to keep those conversations going. And, people sometimes try and minimise these strategies and say, oh, yeah, that's all well and good, but they could still have a problem. What I just mentioned there reduces risk by 95%.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that. It feels like there's not
and the
really
kids can
any.
still have fun. Yeah, and play the game. So I think games are very good. There's little creative websites. There's now I'm not promoting any of these, but there's there's Mathletics, and there's little word game videos word games that young people can play. When they're at school. Look, the thing is, when there's people managing it, they're the platforms properly. They're the platforms that I believe are healthy for children, where people are responsible for their actions. And if someone does make a bad choice, if it's reported, that it's addressed. So that's what I would say. People look out for programs that are prepared to do that. So look, yeah, there's lots of educational programs, of course. And do you know what? When I was going to school, if I was going to do a project on Japan, I'd have to go to the library and they'd have one book, and it would have been checked out by somebody. Now kids in primary school can get online and talk to children in Japan. So, and it can interpret under it. So that must expand someone's mind, being able to do that. So look, there are great programs out there, and the eSafety Commission, I believe, talks about some of those on their website, esafety.gov.au, and they're the federal government go-to body. So,
yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot of those positives there come down to this notion of learning. I'm just trying to draw a distinction between what, say, these children might be learning via technology and the digital world at school. Is there anything that they might be able to log on to outside of school that obviously would come with risks, social media wise in some regard? But is there anything that does what are the positives that people get out of it, or young people?
Yeah, look, it's very hard for me to say that, only because the purpose of social media is that it is largely uncontrolled. The first thing is this: no identity verification. So that's the first thing. So, without that, anybody can be any single person. I know there's child sex offenders in Roblox right this very second trying to connect with and groom children. I'm not saying kick kids out of roadblocks. I'm saying that, you know, that's one aspect of it. So where is somewhere that's safe where they can interact? Look, I think platforms where they can pick and choose and only invite people in that they choose. That would be in the perfect world, but being pragmatic, look, the right protections in place. I think a young person, particularly 16 and over, can benefit from social media if it's used for the right purposes and very strategically. I mean, one, you put your privacy settings in place. I mean, that's a gimme. You know, everything comes down to our identity. If we haven't learned that our identity is worth more than gold now, I don't know what's going to show us that. So privacy settings to sort of try and control who gets access to your information, determining who can and can't connect with you. Another big thing, and this happens to adults as well, a psychologist, a prominent Australian psychologist actually said to me that the human brain, particularly young people, when they see something that's out of the ordinary or concerning or violent, their mind's automatically drawn to it because it's not the norm. And that's what they will focus on. Like if they're being bullied by 5 people online, they think everybody's bullying them and they feel on their own. They don't see the billions of people who aren't bullying them. Their attention's drawn to that. So encouraging all people to move away from content that we know probably isn't the best for us. And that's hard to do sometimes, but it's all about, surrounding yourself with good people. It's sort of that principle. You'll be happy if you surround yourself with good people. If you surround yourself with bad people, you're probably going to feel like them. There was some research done where they got a student who was very problematic. I think this was done in England, and they put him in a very exclusive school into a friendship group of 6 high-achieving, very well-balanced students. Instead of them raising him up, he dragged all them down. So, which I thought was very, very interesting. And look, technology in that way, if our kids are going to expose themselves to negative content, that's what's going to create, of course, a lot of mental health issues and, a distorted perception of the world that we live in. Yeah. So I think they can use it, but they're taught to distance themselves from negative content, not to get involved in it, put privacy settings in place, keep talking to real people, particularly if they have an issue online. Because I sort of say to people, look, the internet's a bit of a paradox, whereby you're actually in the most public place you'll ever be, 5 billion people. At the same time, you're in the most private place because you're up here in your mind, and that is a very lonely place.
On the topic of vigilance and parental involvement and guidance, and even just from a practical perspective, what's the biggest challenges in regulating something like the internet to ensure kids are safe? So we know that Australia is almost a leader at the moment with this legislation, and I've seen other countries start talking about implementing something similar. How does this work? Does that require potentially a cohesive global approach, or is it still going to be regional? How practical is doing something like this?
Look, it is such a challenge that I don't think humankind's ever seen something like it, to try and manage technological use. I know in law enforcement, we really struggled with it because law enforcement before the internet was very geographically based. I mean, as a Queensland police officer, I couldn't even go across the New South Wales border. I lost all my powers. I wasn't licensed to carry a gun. So we were always very geographically based. The internet has forced police to change that. So, you might have a child sex offender online in Canada who's offending against a child in Queensland. How do you investigate that? So great leaps forwards have been made. There's a virtual global task force. I don't know whether that still exists, but there's the federal bodies, law enforcement bodies of each country are working together. And they could say, look, this guy has forwarded a child abuse image. What we need that as evidence. We can't forward that to the other police because that would be an offence. So lots of changes has been made, and it was always a challenge. Now, when it comes to us as a community managing, child safety online, it is going to be difficult because we have not only different stakeholders, we have stakeholders with different motivations. We have our government, which is being represented in this case by the Safety Commission, who of course is a government body. We have social media companies who, of course, their main objective is to make as much money as they can. And they can only really be the ones who are even half based in this country and will work with the government. Then we have internet service providers, of course, where people access the internet. They will be a stakeholder as well. I mean, if they, it would be, it's possible to do anything. I mean, they could filter out bad websites, but they have said that will slow the internet down, and business just won't be able to
Right.
operate.
Yeah.
They've had all these discussions, but there's also going to be there's going to be other stakeholders like school representatives, parent bodies, and to actually manage it is I think a fair way off, because you're going to have
Right.
countries that aren't prepared to do it in the first place. They're not interested. So companies may then start to be run from them, and they still get access
Yeah,
into Australia.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's a really interesting point, and I guess that kind of was leading into my next question. That so we know that the internet has a whole range of very negative and dangerous situations. We know there's a whole lot of positive and great opportunities and things that it presents itself for young people. How can we all either push for, or parents can help manage, or those service providers or the platforms, etc.? Like, what changes do you think are most critical for all of us to make, both individually and collectively, to ensure the safety of children everywhere around the world?
Yeah, look, I really don't think the main change is going to come from social media companies, internet service providers, or the government. Now, I say this, and never do I judge a parent. It was a hard enough job as it was without dumping technology on top. But I think it's going to come down to the grassroots of each family. And I think we're doing a pretty good job. Gareth, we have been talking about some of the negatives, but I think we're doing an amazing job as a community. Every school now has acceptable user policies. So kids are getting used to rules and contracts at school. Every single school is doing some form of cyber safety education. It may be even how to, if you're going to have a social networking site, how to set it up safely, some of the things to look out for. So I think it is ultimately going to come down to the parent body appreciating the importance and the value of playing that role, and which will give them the courage to sometimes say no so they can manage it, but also that they understand, because every family is different as well. So they understand that technology can play an incredibly effective role in a young person's life. And I believe it's essential. What I say at schools is when these kids leave this educational environment, there is almost no chance that they're going to be involved in a job, a pastime, an occupation, study, where they're not going to have to use technology. I think we need to embrace that, start the education as early as possible. And most schools now are, kids in year 1 and 2, they're getting online at school. And it gives them a great opportunity to let them know the pitfalls. Like you said before, I don't think it'd be healthy to cut young people off the internet totally till they're 15, then give them a device. I mean, then they're going to be like a kid in a candy shop when they're probably at the most vulnerable stage in their life. So yeah, I think there's lots of positives. I think the parent body at this time is the crucial stakeholder that probably needs to move forward when it comes to understanding that world, understanding that role, and being that parent. A lot of parents are doing it. I speak to them. A lot aren't. They just wipe their hands and say, oh, well, the technology is the kids' thing. That family will have issues.
Yeah, so it sounds like it needs to be a very concerted effort from every angle to kind of do
Yeah.
this. And it's something not hilariously ironic, but something very ironic in the fact that it's going to take a bit of community building and everyone kind of coming together to focus on the positives and create something positives, when to an extent community building is something that the digital world strips away as we get so more narrow and narrower into our
Yeah.
own little worlds, as we've touched on. All right, just to finish up then, what's one piece of advice you'd offer anyone concerned about their child's risk online, that they're not really sure about how they can approach it, how they could bring it up with, their kids, and just something that might be comfortable for them to do that they could do right away?
Right away, I have lots of advice. No, look, I know the key, whether it's adults or whether it's young people, is communication. What that specific communication looks like, I think a parent is probably fairly adept at talking to their kids, knowing the personality of their kids, because every child is different. I can say this to a parent, is that the very first question a potential child sex offender would ask me online would be, do you talk to your parents about what you do on the internet? If the answer is yes, they're gone. They will not touch me. Bad things only happen in one place online, and that's in private. If they think that someone else is going to see or find out or get involved, they leave that child alone. They need that perception of privacy. That's why I always say open communication. Kids aren't the greatest detectives when it comes to hiding their emotions. So I've lost count the amount of children who have been saved because someone, a teacher, a parent, an uncle, an auntie, one of their friends' parents has asked them a question. And just because of that response, that adult felt instincts within themselves, nothing to do with technology. They felt an instinct that something wasn't quite right. When we talk to our kids, it gives them a feeling of support, that they're not on their own. Letting them know that if you ever have a problem, come to me, I'm on your side. We can fix it and you can get on having a good time. So I'd like to make it more complicated, but it really comes down to never underestimating the value and the power of having those lines of communication. Hey, what programs are you using? Is everything going okay? Hey, have you been chatting to your friends online? Have you seen anything that confuses you or upsets you? Just simple questions about them as a person. So that would be my one piece of advice. Communication.
It makes a lot of sense, as we all know, that there's certain things that you can only learn through life experience. And as we mentioned earlier, unfortunately, young people, or lucky for them, they're not old enough yet to kind of have experienced enough life and wish they were younger again. But thanks so much for that, Brett. What's on the horizon for you, and where can people follow what you're up to?
We have a website called internetsafeeducation.com. We do have a Facebook page, Brett Lee and Internet Safe Education. And we do have what's called a cyber safety hub. So if you go to our website, that's a 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, where we do live webinars for parents on different topics, different programs. We've done one on Fortnite. We've done a couple on Roblox. Anything parents want to find out about, you can contact eSafety through there. We have little courses for, kids. We have resources for parents. We got a parent course that only takes about 20 minutes. So that's how you can connect. Internet Safe Education, all one word. Sorry, it's so long. .com. And thank you, Gareth. It's been a great chat. Thank you.
For more info on what we've discussed today, check out the show notes. If you enjoyed this one, you can subscribe to Ruined by the Internet on your favourite podcast app and help spread the word by sharing this episode or leaving a review. I'm Gareth King. See you next time.